In the Arctic, a group of workers is excavating deep inside a frozen cave. During their work, they uncover something trapped within the ice. They cut a large block to extract it, and then a helicopter transports it to a lab. Inside the lab, Stanley, a seasoned doctor with extensive knowledge of Arctic history and Eskimo culture, is introduced to Dr. Diane and her team of scientists. The team is buzzing with excitement, believing they've unearthed a prehistoric animal. They reference a discovery from 1898 when Russian scientists found a frozen mammoth with viable cells. Fueling their hopes for a breakthrough, the team begins delicately cutting through the ice block with a laser, layer by layer, to ensure they don't damage the specimen. To their shock, the being inside is not an animal but a human, a Neanderthal hunter who, according to Stanley's analysis, lived 20 to 40,000 years ago. While Stanley is eager to examine the find more closely, Diane explains their primary objective: dissecting the body to distribute samples to leading research centers worldwide. Afterward, the scientists bypass the body and monitor its brain using electrodes. The tests indicate that the Neanderthal's cells and organs are in perfect condition. While the tests continue, the scientists are shocked to notice sudden light brain activity coming from the Neanderthal. They decide to try to revive the man, so they intubate him and shock him with a defibrillator until they detect a strong heartbeat. Once the caveman is stable, they remove the intubation, and the Neanderthal begins to wake up. He is very confused by his surroundings, the noises, and the masked faces, so he immediately starts panicking. Stanley takes his mask off, and the caveman calms down when he sees a human face, allowing the others to put him to sleep with an injection. Afterward, the group discusses the future of the caveman. The Arctic team believes they can find a way to freeze cancer patients and unfreeze them when humanity finds a cure, potentially achieving immortality. Stanley argues that the caveman should first be studied in a natural environment, which would teach them more about prehistoric times. After much persuasion, he convinces the team to give him 2 weeks to conduct his own research. Soon, a special vivarium is set up, and they place the Neanderthal inside. When he wakes up, he finds the environment familiar and begins going through his usual routine. He drinks juice from berries to quench his thirst and chases a bird away from its nest to steal the eggs. In the evening, he starts a fire using stones and cooks his food. In the mornings, he washes his body under a waterfall but accidentally finds a hose and breaks the end. Confused by the metal, after lots of sniffing and licking, he starts following the hose, pulling it out from the ground until he reaches a metal door. He shakes the door until he manages to open it, prompting the scientists to rush to close a second door to keep him from entering. The creatures from the lab start roaring, and the scientists make lots of noises to scare the man away. Furious, the Neanderthal climbs the waterfall and finds the machine that powers it. He starts screaming as he tries to break the machine and hits the wall. So a scientist enters the vivarium and shoots him with a tranquilizer dart. Later, Stanley goes to meet the caveman without carrying any weapons or objects to avoid scaring him. The wary caveman begins running around, growling and yelling while finding spots to protect himself. Stanley is scared but still approaches him slowly until they're face to face. After some hesitation, the caveman jumps on Stanley and gets ready to hit him with a rock, but he gets distracted by a scientist yelling from above. Since Stanley doesn't try to defend himself, the Neanderthal drops the rock. He then takes a closer look at Stanley, noticing how different his body is from his own. The man puts his fingers in Stanley's mouth, pulls at his clothes, and squeezes his groin to confirm he's not missing certain parts. Stanley screams in pain, and the Neanderthal backs off before introducing himself as Aru, which Stanley changes to Charlie. In return, Stanley teaches him to say his name and even makes Charlie laugh. Noticing the scars on his chest, Stanley asks about them, and Charlie calls them Bita while pointing up. The shape of the scars and the gesturing make Stanley think it means bird. Charlie steals Stanley's cross necklace, and after biting it, he begins repeating some words and gesturing with his hands. But Stanley can't understand what he's trying to say. Suddenly, a helicopter appears above the facility. Since the ceiling is made of glass, Charlie sees it and freaks out. He starts climbing up the rocks while repeating Bita, his word for bird. The scientists immediately tell the helicopter to leave, but Charlie won't calm down. He climbs to the top of the vivarium and keeps screaming Bita at the ceiling. Sometime later, Stanley visits a tribe of Eskimos and shares the words he heard from Charlie, which the group recognizes. Stanley rushes back to the lab to share his discovery with Diane. Bita refers to Sedna, the legend of a large bird that acts as God's messenger and carries people to heaven or hell depending on their behavior. He theorizes that Charlie's tribe went extinct when the magnetic pole flipped and killed all the animals in the area. Charlie probably felt it was a punishment from God and went on a dream walk. Meaning he went out to find the bird and offer himself in exchange for the return of the animals. Charlie now thinks the helicopter is Sedna, so there's no way they'll calm him down. 34 hours later, Charlie is wearing all his clothes, tools, and various trinkets Stanley gave him over the past few days. He also uses crushed berries as paint to decorate his skin. Charlie never stops chanting, obviously eagerly waiting for the return of his god. Whenever Stanley enters the vivarium, Charlie hides until he's gone, refusing to communicate. One afternoon, Charlie takes the stairs, his curiosity ignited after watching Stanley press the button so many times. He sneaks into the lab, careful to avoid being spotted by scientists. In a quiet corridor, he finds a mirror and growls at his reflection, mistaking it for an opponent. Angered, he smashes it with his spear. A voice booms from the speakers, startling Charlie into a panicked run. He ends up in the lab animal's room, where a bird catches his attention until a bear growls, sending him moving again. At the next corridor, he collides with glass doors but soon figures out how they open and stumbles into another room. A loud vehicle frightens him, and he hides behind a copy machine, accidentally turning it on. The noise scares him even more, and he bolts again. Charlie enters a lab, knocking over a jar of acid that burns his hand slightly. The lights go out, and he panics, climbing furniture and breaking equipment. A scientist hears the commotion, turns the lights back on, and surprises Charlie. Instinctively, Charlie attacks, killing the man with his spear. Alarms blare as Charlie dashes down a random tunnel, shivering as it grows colder. He bursts through a fire exit and sees a helicopter. With a loud yell, he leaps onto its skis. The pilot tries to grab him, but Charlie lets go, gliding briefly through the air before meeting his end with an odd sense of joy.